Hi everyone! Welcome to the first episode of Lizz Draws. Today, I will be doodling Tenn's Road to Infinity outfit from the anime IDOLiSH7. Since this is the first episode of Lizz Draws, I wanted to start off with a quick and simple topic to ease everyone into the flow of the series. In this video, I will be discussing monochromatic shading techniques, as well as these ingredients to make doodles appear more visually interesting. Feel free to follow along and incorporate these techniques into your own doodles. With that being said, let's get started with today's episode, shall we? For this video, let's get straight into the shading of this drawing. In my monochromatic doodle style, I primarily focus on using the transparent watercolor tool in order to create soft shadows and forms. I love the aesthetic created from this brush and how the colors mix together, which makes shading very easy and fun to do. To provide some insight on shading in digital art, it's important to consider the direction you pull your brush strokes in, as well as the pressure sensitivity. Both of these factors heavily affect how colors are brought out, and it's important to understand this when using digital brushes to shade. In order to explain this, let's say you had a square. It'll be pink for the sake of this example since I'm shading the drawing in pink. Using the transparent watercolor tool, if your stroke originates from the outside of the square or the area drawn, it'll fade out and wash the colors, or bring a different color into the mixture. However, if you start your stroke from inside the square, it'll blend the colors and bring them outward in the direction specified. The more pressure you apply to the stroke, the colors will appear more prominent as a result. Doing this can allow for a soft, gradual shading, creating a bit of a painterly look. While shading, you may want to consider the alpha or transparent option. This turns your brush into an eraser by making the strokes transparent. Use this to your advantage if you have a soft brush that blends and mixes nicely. I often use this with the transparent watercolor brush because of how soft it is. With this in mind, let's return to the original piece. You'll notice that I alternate back and forth laying down my shadows and bringing it outwards, then feathering and fading out the color by coming from the opposite direction. While doing this, I'm keeping in mind the general light source and where the light is coming from, which I determine would be the top right of the drawing. I also keep in mind clothing folds and any areas of overlap in the drawing, as this casts more shadows onto the figure. This general shading process of going back and forth applies both to the clothes and the face, as it creates the natural, soft, gradual look I'm aiming for. Now that we've got most of the basic shading down, let's move on to the hair. I use the same principle of lay down the color and then feather, except this time, I focus in on making shapes with the shadows that adhere to Tenn's hair, and not just a general shadow. While shading this, I would create wavy lines near the middle of his hair, and I would define them by using the transparent watercolor brush, erasing at those lines to make the line more narrow. Once I finished the shadows, I moved on to laying down some highlights with both the transparent watercolor brush and the soft airbrush. Once I blocked in those shapes, I then refined them by using the soft eraser. An important tip I'd like to bring up for shading is that some shapes are easier to create from erasing rather than drawing it correctly the first time. Use your erasers to your advantage. By doing this, it makes it a lot easier to do certain shapes that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Now that I've finished shading the hair and the rest of the piece, it's time to add a gradient. I like adding gradients as it creates a pop of color that makes it more visually interesting to look at. I opted to use a gradient that went from dark pink to yellow as I felt it had a nice contrast and transition. It aligned well with the original outfit's colors as well, which is an added bonus. My color choices in my gradients take inspiration from a color palette collection I found online. If you're interested in getting inspiration for more color palettes, I highly suggest checking out the description, which contains this folder that I refer to a lot. Once you determine what your gradient would look like, enable the clip to layer below option. By doing so, the gradients will only affect the area defined below it, which is the shading and sketch layers. If you're still not entirely sure what clipping layers do, an example of clipping layers and the difference between it being enabled and disabled will be displayed on screen. It's like magic, isn't it? It's kind of hard to explain what a clipping layer does, but once you get into the hang of digital art and mess around with settings and read tutorials, you'll be able to pick up on this feature as time goes on. Now here's the fun part. To add an explosion of color, I like to use CSP's set of realistic watercolor brushes to make it look as if color is emanating out of the character. I'm personally a huge sucker for this aesthetic, and I just love seeing the pop of colors. I mean, it's kind of obvious if you go on my Twitter. Check out my Twitter for more art. I used the combination of the soft bleed, rough wash, and textured blender tools in order to create this background, as well as the airbrush spray and decorative brushes to put sparkles onto the piece. I also added a drop shadow as well for additional contrast and pop, because why not? When it comes to the background, play around with whatever aesthetics you like. Watercolor, sparkles, abstract shapes, drop shadows, refract shards, etc. The freedom is really up to you, but I personally love combining these together for a simple yet aesthetic background. Once you're satisfied with the background elements, that's all there is to it. This type of monochromatic shading is very soothing and simple to do once you get the hang of the brushes and how to do it. I use this style for most of my doodles and I can't get enough of it. Personally speaking, my piece of Tenn in his Road to Infinity outfit is one of my favorite monochromatic doodles. You can find the full piece linked below in the description. Feel free to support the piece by liking and retweeting it. It'd be much appreciated. If anyone would like to offer their own takes on monochromatic shading and doodles, feel free to leave your experiences in the comments. Questions for clarification and advice for how I can run this series in the future is also welcome. I'd love to hear what you all think, and I'll respond to the comments to provide additional clarification and thanks as needed. If you enjoyed watching this video, consider clicking the like button and subscribing for more art videos on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be covering more complex illustrations and pieces in the future. With that being said, thanks for watching today's episode of Lizz Draws. I hope to see you all in the next one!